Lost all respect for me as a husband, father, pastor, friend. So I just need to set the record straight. I got outvoted. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I fought the good fight. I kind of held the line. I staved off Christmas decor until after Thanksgiving like a sane human adult. Quick vote. Who was able to hold out until Thanksgiving with the decorations? Where are my early decorators at? You're all animals, all animals. Okay, so this year, my wife and my children, they formed a voting block against me. Literally, my tiny toddlers were chanting at me like a preschool mob, and so I didn't stand a chance, so down came the boxes. The first one I opened up had the big, bold nativity label on it, and that was the chaos box. You know the chaos box. We all have one. It's the one that you open up and immediately you just kind of loathe your past self for the decisions they made last January. So I cracked it open and it looked like someone had just panini pressed the entire Holy Family right in there. Shepherds are upside down. There's like Joseph's staff jammed into the wise man's ear. There's carnage everywhere. And we kind of start laying out the pieces, and immediately my kids went feral on me. My 1-year-old grabs baby Jesus and shoves him straight into his mouth. Like full send, holy infant, so tender and mild, straight into the mouth. In his excitement, he also dropped the camel, so now I have a single humped camel. Which, to be fair, I'm actually fine with because 2 humped camels come from Asia. Jesus is from the Middle East, so at least we're a little bit more biblically accurate now, you know what I mean? With my 1-humped Arabian camel. Meanwhile, my 4-year-old is going around naming all the characters with like perfect accuracy. And I'm proud up until the moment she decided to kind of add her own characters in the story. Apparently, Anna and Elsa were there that first Christmas. They're standing right next to the wise man singing Let It Go softly over Bethlehem that first Christmas. And I know we laugh, but honestly, that chaotic, messy, disorganized nativity, I think it's so much closer to the real Christmas story than the polished ones we put on our mantles. We romanticize the first Christmas, don't we? We clean it up, we sanitize it, we make it safe. We sing Silent Night, but there was nothing silent about labor in the barn next to the farm animals. We sing O Little Town of Bethlehem like it was this quaint, peaceful Hallmark village, but Bethlehem was overcrowded, it was chaotic, it was smelly, it was stressful. Mary wasn't serenely smiling with her perfectly curled hair. She was an unprepared, unwed teenage girl. She was exhausted, scared, probably going into labor prematurely because our government had forced her to travel for a census. You go to Joseph and well, he's in this weird like kind of stepdad situation. He's trying to protect a woman carrying a child that isn't his biologically. And you could just imagine the Christmas conversations that he had as he tries to explain why this son doesn't look like him. Jesus, he's born in a place where animals were kept, no cribs, no bassinets. He didn't have a baby Bjorn. No baby Bjorn. I don't know how he slept. He gets placed in a feeding trough, and not even like a cute Joanna Gaines sort of rustic one. It's a half clean, but still smells like animal feed kind of one. From there, the story gets even more scandalous. The first people to hear about the birth of the Savior, they're stinky shepherds. They're so looked down upon that they're not even allowed to testify in court. If they wanted to, they couldn't have even signed the birth certificate as a witness. The wise men, they're not kings. They're actually pagan astrologers who showed up 2 years late. They missed the whole thing. What I'm really trying to tell you is that your nativity scenes have been lying to you all these years. I know I just ruined someone's Christmas. I'm sorry. Here's the point I'm trying to make. The Christmas story is not clean, it's not pristine, it's not glowing with angelic light. It's the story of Jesus entering the chaos, the pain, the scandal, the poverty, the dysfunction, and the injustices of our world. You could say it like this: Christmas is Jesus coming from the least of these for the least of these. And that's why we're doing this series. We're going to take the next few weeks to desanitize the Christmas story just a little bit and talk about the reality of who Jesus came from and who he came for. And we're going to explore this through the eyes of Matthew. Matthew, as in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew was a close follower of Jesus. He's one of the original 12 disciples. He's an eyewitness to Jesus' life, but he is also an outsider of that group. He was a tax collector, and so he's kind of ostracized from the others. And I think we get this. Does anyone want an IRS agent hanging around them all the time? I don't. If you work for the IRS, I'm sorry. And yet, this very man, tax collector Matthew, gets the honor of writing the very first words of the New Testament about Jesus. Here's how Matthew chooses to begin his Christmas story. This is Matthew 1:1. Matthew writes, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob. And all God's people say, wow, that's kind of boring. And at face value, I have to admit, this is a weird way to open the story of Jesus. At least in Luke's gospel, you get like shepherds and angels. John goes cosmic with this poetic and philosophical treaty. In the beginning was the Word, but Matthew gives you a genealogy, and it's just a long list of names that none of us know how to pronounce. And so if you're like me, what you do is you just skim over it. But Matthew is doing something really intentional here. You see, during the first century, when biographies of great people were written, they would often start with a genealogy. It was their way of saying, hey, you should really take this person seriously. Now, I think we kind of understand this idea. If a king claimed authority, he has to prove he comes from royal blood. See, greatness comes from greatness in the economy of our world. So when Matthew begins his gospel with a genealogy, his original audience, they would have just nodded right along. They know exactly what he's doing. He is building the legal, the historical case that Jesus is the long-promised king. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the anointed one who is supposed to rule over Israel and ultimately the world. And at first glance, Matthew's list reads exactly how you'd expect it to. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, King David, these are big names, giant figures. These are the spiritual and national heroes of Israel. And Matthew, he's basically saying to him, see, Jesus is the real rightful king and heir. His story is rooted in the story of God's people. His bloodline runs straight through our history and faith. In other words, Matthew starts by showing you that Jesus comes from greatness, because that's what everyone expected a king's resume to look like. But then Matthew does something a little weird. He hits us with a speed bump when he adds the next line. Notice what he says here. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of who? Judah and his brothers. And what happens here, if you know the family story, that line should make you pause just a little bit, because we just hit the family drama. If you remember all the way back in Genesis, Jacob has 12 sons. He's the head of the 12 tribes of Israel, but his favorite son was Joseph, the golden child with the fancy coat of many colors. You might have even seen him on Broadway. The other brothers got so jealous of Joseph that they threw him into a pit and left him for dead. But this is the moment when Judah speaks up. He's one of the brothers. And you think he's going to be the hero when he says these words. He says to his brothers, what are we going to gain if we kill Joseph and cover up his blood? And as you read that, you think, oh my goodness, this guy is going to save Joseph. Way to go, Judah. But then he finishes the sentence. He says, so instead, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites. Come on, let's make some money off him. Don't kill him. We won't make any money that way. We're just going to sell him into slavery. That's who Judah is, and that's who Matthew includes in his genealogy. Not Joseph, the brother who literally saves Israel. Not Benjamin, the youngest innocent one. Or honestly, any other brother would do. No, Jesus comes from who? Judah. But look, I think we could give him a pass, because we all have one of those relatives in our family, right? Like the one that we all hope doesn't show up for Christmas, the one we don't talk about. If you don't have that relative, you might be that relative. And now I really ruined Christmas for some of you guys. That's who Judah is. He's that guy. So you would expect Matthew, writing a royal genealogy, to just quietly skip past him, move along, bury it under, but he doesn't. Instead, he goes out of his way to do something no ancient biographer would ever do. He drags the family scandal right into the spotlight. Watch how Matthew continues. He says, Abraham, the father of Isaac, Isaac, the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. The scandal, the horror. You guys don't look appalled enough right now. You don't know the story of Tamar? Of course you don't. None of us do, because we skipped over it in Sunday school class. If there was ever a part of the story to sanitize or to kick out, it would be this one, because the account of Tamar, it's one of incest, it's prostitution, deception, it's forced sexual exploitation. It is R-rated, it's messy, it's dark, and it's absolutely not the kind of story anyone tells at Christmas. So we're going to tell it today for Christmas at Liquid. Because Matthew includes it right on page 1 of the New Testament. Which, by the way, this is a really great time to remind you that we have some incredible kids environments across all of our campuses, if you want to take advantage of that. I just take no responsibility for any awkward lunch conversations you have with your kids after this sermon, because, to be honest, you've been warned. Before we jump into Genesis 38, into the account of Tamar, I just want to remind you that Matthew's genealogy is shocking for 2 reasons. First off, ancient biographers did everything they could to make their kings look flawless. They polished the family tree, they hide the embarrassing relatives, they stack the resume with greatness to prove greatness. But Matthew goes in the opposite direction. He's making the case that Jesus comes from the least of these for the least of these. Not from a spotless, sanitized bloodline, but from a line marked by trauma, injustice, exploitation, and moral failure. The second thing, though, is that Matthew includes a woman. And nobody in the ancient world would put women in their genealogies. Lineage, names, inheritance, they are all traced through men. Women's names would never show up unless the author wanted to spotlight something extraordinary. So Matthew breaks all the rules, and he puts Tamar onto page 1. And he does this not to embarrass Jesus, but to show you the kind of king that Jesus is. So let's keep those 2 things in mind as we jump into the account. But fair warning, Tamar's story is wild, it's complex, it's the kind of story you never saw on a felt board in Sunday school. So I had our team put together a little flow chart to help us understand this. It's a pretty good flow chart right there. And just fair warning, the family tree is gonna get circular, but we're gonna work with this together. Here's the cliff notes. This is Judah. He's looking good right there. But don't forget, this is the same Judah who just sold his brother into slavery. Right after that event, this stand-up guy goes to Canaan and he marries a woman named Shua. You guys with me still? We're pretty simple here. These 2 have 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Everyone say You guys would make great pirates. Sorry. Okay, so when the oldest comes of age, Judah goes out and arranges a marriage for him, which feels weird to us, but this was totally normal in the ancient Middle East. Today, we've got like Tinder and Bumble and Hinge. Back then, they had mom and dad. It's the same concept, though, just way less swiping. So Judah picks Tamar as the wife for his firstborn son. There's Tamar. But before Tamar and can have a child, dies unexpectedly. It's a tragedy for the whole family. And here's where we need just a little bit of cultural background. In that world, if a husband died before giving his wife, children, the next of kin was responsible to kind of take her as his wife and give her a child to carry on the family name. This isn't about romance, it's just really about survival. And what it was meant to do was to protect the widow and just ensure that the family line continued. So Tamar, our main character, is given to the next brother, Onan. Are you guys still with me? We're getting more complicated here. We're going to add way more names. And I'm going to try to keep this PG, but according to the text, Onan chooses to have a physical relationship with Tamar, but it refuses to impregnate her. I'm just going to let you fill in the details of how that works. And Onan does this because if Tamar has a son, he realizes that the child legally belongs to his older brother, which means that he's going to have to split the inheritance with a baby that isn't considered his. So, if you're following along, he uses Tamar for pleasure, but intentionally withholds from her the one thing she needs for protection, dignity, and a future, a child. And this is one of the just clearest examples of sexual exploitation in the scriptures. And before we move on, I want to pause here, because in a room this size, I know that there are people here that carry the weight of their own story of sexual abuse. And if that's you, I want to say I'm so sorry. What happened to you was evil. It never should have happened. And with everything in us, we can name it for what it is, true evil. And I also want you to hear this, that the Bible is often descriptive, not prescriptive. It is not telling us here in Genesis 38 what should happen. It's telling us what did happen. And the ancestors of Jesus, they're real people who are walking through real pain, real injustice, real trauma. But notice that God doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't sanitize it. Instead, what he does is he meets people right in the middle of it. Tamar experienced sexual abuse at the hands of the very man who was supposed to protect her. And the scriptures, they're not condoning this. In fact, Genesis calls out Onan for his actions. He says they're wicked, so wicked that Onan dies. And now Tamar is a widow again, still childless, still vulnerable. So Judah, being the stand-up guy that he is, he sends Tamar back to her father's house and says, hey, when my youngest, Shelah, comes of age, you can marry him. But we quickly find out that Judah has no intention of ever giving his son to her. So Tamar is left totally alone. Her innocence has been completely taken. She cannot remarry because of that. She has no child. Her worth in that culture has been completely stripped away by Judah and his sons. She is used and abused. She is forgotten and cast aside. That's the story of Tamar. Merry Christmas, Liquid. It just puts you in the Christmas spirit, doesn't it? So why in the world would Matthew go so far out of his way to say that this woman, Tamar, is in the family line of Jesus? Do you want to know the answer? It's because Jesus came from the least of these for the least of these. Can I say it more clearly? Jesus came from people like Tamar to show that he is for people like Tamar. I just want to pause and sit in that for a second, because I know that there are people here today watching online at our campuses that are walking and feeling the same as Tamar, feeling lonely, forgotten, overlooked, maybe even discarded. For many of us, Christmas isn't always a celebration. It's actually a reminder of the parts of our story that are broken. The addiction, the unemployment, the singleness, the divorce, the loneliness, the anxiety, the infertility, the estrangement, the grief, the shame, the secrets. Maybe you walked in here to church today carrying a weight that you've been hiding for months or years. Maybe someone who should have protected you was actually the one that wounded you. Maybe December just feels like pressure to smile, to pretend, to keep it all together. Maybe the holidays amplify everything that you wish wasn't true about your story. And if that's you, I want you to hear me clearly. Jesus came from a broken story so that people with broken stories would know that they still belong. So I don't know who you are. I don't know what's been done to you or spoken over you. I don't know the betrayal you've carried or the shame that you've buried. I don't know the names that you've called yourselves or the names that have been called onto you. But I do know this. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not too far gone. You are not too messed up, too damaged, or too late. I know this, that Jesus is not finished with you. Your story is not over. You may still feel like the least of these, but I have news for you. Jesus left heaven for the least of these. He left heaven with you in mind. And I know this is true because Tamar's story wasn't over either. Not even close, because you're not going to believe what happens next. Years go on. Tamar is still stuck in her father's home. She's wearing widow's clothes. She's waiting on a promise that Judah never planned to keep. She's forgotten, powerless, voiceless, but she is not defeated. One day she hears that Judah is headed to a nearby town to shear his sheep. And listen, in the ancient world, sheep shearing season was a euphemism for a bachelor party in Atlantic City. So lots of drinking, lots of partying, and even more bad decisions. So Tamar forms a plan. I'm not saying it's a good plan, I'm not saying it's a moral plan. I'm not saying she should have had this plan. I'm just saying she has a plan, and it's the plan of someone who is desperate. And she disguises herself as a prostitute. She covers her face, and she positions herself right on the road that Judah will walk. Judah sees her, and shocker, he fails the character test once again. He approaches her, he sleeps with her, he has no idea that it is his daughter-in-law. And guys, I get it, the Bible's a little weird sometimes. For reference, let's go back to our flow chart here. Our family tree has turned into a family circle. If Ancestry.com saw this, the site would crash. But don't worry, because the Bible makes no apologies for this. The story's just going to get weirder for here. Tamar demands payment for her services in the form of a goat. Judah checks his wallet, realizes that he's fresh out of goats. Which, side note, if you ever find yourself, can I pay for sex later? I left my goats at home. You're already knee deep in bad decision making. Nothing good is coming out of that situation. So instead of the goat, Tamar asks for collateral. She says to Judah, give me your credit card and ID. Okay, not quite. She says, give me your seal, your cord, your staff. These are 3 items that every first century or ancient Israeli man would have guarded with his life. The seal was a signature ring that he would use to sign legal documents. The cord would hang around his neck, and it would carry his family name, so he would identify himself as the head of the family. And the staff was a walking stick that's engraved with his own distinctive markings. And all 3 of these things, they represent Judah's identity and his status within the community. And he just hands them to Tamar and says, hold on to these. I'm going to be right back with the goat for payment. Tamar takes those items, disappears into the night, and she now has Judah's entire reputation in her hands. You guys all following along? Because now's where the story gets real interesting. We're going to pick up the last twist. We're going to pick it up in Genesis 38:24. Watch what happens next. 3 months later, Judah gets told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. And Judah says, you know what we should do? We're going to bring her out and burn her to death. The drama, telenovelas, got nothing on the Bible, guys. No one can ever say this book is boring. Judah doesn't realize the child is his own. This is the height of hypocrisy. It is the height of self-righteousness. Judah has no issue sleeping with a woman when he thinks that she's a prostitute. But the moment that he thinks that his daughter-in-law did something scandalous, suddenly he's the morality police. He's totally fine with his sin, but outraged by hers. And let me pause right there again. Because for a whole lot of us, me included, Judah's actions here, they function kind of like an uncomfortable mirror we'd rather not look into. Growing up, I was always taught that it was our sin that separated us from God. But the more that I read the Bible, the more that I've started to realize something else. More often than not, it's actually our self-righteousness that keeps us furthest from God. Let me prove my point. When Jesus told the story of the prodigal son, the sinful and rebellious younger son ends up inside in the feast with the father. It's the self-righteous older brother that stands outside fuming. When Jonah preaches to Nineveh, it's the wicked, sinful people who repent and celebrate with God. It's Jonah that sits outside the city alone, miserable, judging everyone else. At the cross, one thief cries out for mercy and is welcomed into paradise, while the other one mocks Jesus with smug self-assurance. Over and over again, the scriptures show us the same pattern, that self-righteousness is this kind of quiet, subtle, deadly belief that says to God, I'm doing just fine without you. And here's the real problem. In 20 years of ministry, I have never had someone walk up to me and say, Pastor, do you know what I'm really struggling with today? A whole lot of self-righteousness in my life. It's never happened. 0 times. In fact, raise your hand today if you walked into church feeling like, I'm feeling pretty self-righteous about myself. Oh, I don't have any takers? No hands up? Exactly. It's almost impossible to see in ourselves. Judah couldn't see it in himself. And yet, it could very well be what's slowly just choking out and killing our relationship with Jesus. So can we have a little bit of fun with this? I wanted to give you a test, a self-righteousness test. And don't worry, this is a safe, judgment-free zone. But I'm going to ask you a few questions. And just see how you're doing. You might be self-righteous if you count how many items someone has in the express checkout line. Oh, there's a lot of us in here. Okay. You might be self-righteous if you believe your way of loading the dishwasher is the only correct God-ordained way. It is, in fact. You might be self-righteous if you hear this sermon and think, wow, I hope the person next to me is really paying attention. I should send this to my mother-in-law. My sister needs to hear this. You might be self-righteous if you think to yourself, at least my kids are not as bad as theirs. Don't worry, guys. As long as none of your kids have desecrated baby Jesus, they're doing better than mine. So you guys are just fine. You might be self-righteous if your political views are not opinions, they're just common sense and everyone else is wrong. Oh, you might be self-righteous if you can't celebrate someone else's successes without secretly comparing it to yours. You assume you're the healthy one and other people are the problem. You might be self-righteous if you avoid asking for help because you don't want to look weak or needy. You might be self-righteous if you forgive slowly because deep down, you're still keeping score. You might be self-righteous if you hide your struggles because your reputation matters more than your healing. Nobody's keeping score here, but go ahead and raise your hand if you might be a little self-righteous today. Yeah, all of us. Anyone else get a 10 out of 10? Just me. Okay, fine, leave me up here all alone. Can I be a little more honest with you guys? There's more Judah in me than I care to admit. It shows up all throughout my life. It shows up in my work, in my ministry, when I compare myself to other people, other pastors, other communicators, other leaders. I don't just want to be better to bless people. I want to be better so I don't feel like I'm falling behind or failing. That's Judah in me. It shows up in my marriage. Casey will be overwhelmed or tired, and instead of just simply loving her where she's at, I'll start silently tallying and keeping score of who's doing more, who's sacrificing more, who's carrying more weight. That's Judah in me. It shows up in my parenting when my kids act out, melt down in public, form a coup against me and voting block. I care less about their hearts, and I care more about what people think of me if I'm a good dad or not. That's Judah in me. Can anyone else relate? The bad news is that we're all a little more like Judah than we care to admit. Can I give you the good news, though? The good news is that Matthew has the audacity to say that that man, Judah, is still in the family line of Jesus. And he goes out of his way to do so. Matthew wants us to know that Jesus came from the self-righteous because he came for the self-righteous. He came for all of us. We are all the least of these. Give God a praise that he came for you this Christmas. We can all so easily forget that Jesus came for us. He came for me. We can forget that we are actually the least of these. And I think that's why Christmas time is so important. It's not just about nostalgia. It's not just about lights and music. Christmas, what it does is it invites us to slow down just long enough to remember that we actually need God in our life. Every single one of us. And that's the real cure to self-righteousness. It's why as a church, we put something together that's really special for you this year. Every day leading up to Christmas, our team has created a short Advent devotional. It's right on the Liquid Church app. It's simple. It's just a couple minutes long. And our staff is literally inviting you at our homes, into our living rooms, into our Christmas traditions and kitchens. And together what we're doing is just looking forward to Jesus with anticipation. And here's what I love about Advent, about this time of year. If self-righteousness says, I'm doing just fine without you, Advent is the daily practice of saying, I actually need you. Because every day it reminds us, I'm not the hero of my story. I'm not the rescuer. I am the one who needs rescuing. So let's make the commitment together that we're going to make space this Christmas for the King who came for all of us. You can find the Advent devotionals on the Liquid Church app. I really do think it's going to be a blessing to all of you because we're all in need of it. And let's be honest, the real struggle, the real question is whether or not we struggle with self-righteousness. It's really what we're going to do when we're confronted with our own self-righteousness. And that's what happens to Judah in our account today. He calls for Tamar to be burned to death for the same sin that he's already committed himself. And here's where the last shocking twist takes place. Here's what the writer of Genesis says. He says, as Tamar was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I'm pregnant by the man who owns these. She said, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. And all God's people say, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. She pulls out a paternity test. This is literally Tamar's mic drop a moment. You can just imagine Judah's face, everything he's buried, every compromise, every secret, every choice he hoped no one would ever find out about. It's all in the light right now. And he realizes, oh no, I'm the dad. And at this moment, he has options. He can lean into his self-righteousness. He can fight back. He can deny it. He can cover it up. He can keep pretending that he's the righteous one. We can all do that with our self-righteousness, in case you were wondering. We can all keep running from our past. We can all keep hiding behind our reputations. But instead, something breaks in Judah. And he says this phrase, and I think this is so powerful. He points to Tamar and he says, she is more righteous than I. And this is huge because for the first time in his whole life, Judah finally sees himself clearly. He drops his mask, he drops his excuses. The self-righteousness shatters, and he says, she is more righteous than I. Not that she's innocent, not that she's perfect, just I am the bigger problem here. And then don't miss this. Matthew knows this story by heart. He thinks about this moment all the time, and he's sitting there writing the Christmas story, and he's like, oh yeah, I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be Judah. I was the self-righteous one. I was the hypocrite. I was the tax collector sinner that no one wanted at their table. And so, of course, Matthew puts Judah's story into Jesus' genealogy because Matthew wants you to see something so stunningly beautiful. If God can redeem Judah, he can redeem you and me. We're a piece of cake. If God can take a man drowning in hypocrisy and turn him into an ancestor of the Messiah, your story's not too far gone. And if you just continue in this account, Tamar eventually gives birth to twin sons. It's Zerah and Perez. And it's through that family line that Jesus is eventually born. Tamar secures her future. She secures her place in the family of God. Judah, meanwhile, is transformed. The very next time we see him, he is offering to lay down his own life to protect his younger brother, Benjamin. The same man who once sold his brother for silver becomes a man who is now willing to sell himself into slavery for his own family. And for most of us, when we hear the story of Judah, we don't think about this whole mess of a circular timeline with Tamar. We think about Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, because God rewrote his story. And that's why Matthew includes Tamar. That's why he includes Judah. That's why he refuses to sanitize the story. It's because Matthew wants you to see the kind of king that Jesus is, the kind of king who steps into the stories that most of us try to hide, the king who meets both the oppressed and the oppressor, the broken and the self-righteous. He meets the Tamars of the world and the Judahs of the world. Matthew wants you to see that there is one more righteous than I, and his name is Jesus. And this Jesus, he came for shepherds and for kings. He came for unwed teenagers, for mothers and stepdads struggling to figure it out. Jesus came for the forgotten widow and the overlooked foreigner. Jesus came for prostitutes and for the self-righteous who pretend they don't need him. Jesus came for people who place historically inaccurate two-humped camels in their nativities. Thank God he does. Jesus came for the broken and for the whole. He came for the single mom holding everything together and for the married couple hanging on by a thread. Jesus came for the parent who feels like they're failing and for the teenager who feels unseen. Jesus came for people who bring more than 10 items into the express checkout line. God bless them. Jesus came for the exhausted and for the anxious. Jesus came for the lonely, the angry, the ashamed, the cynical, the addicted, the betrayed, and the betrayer. Jesus came for the ones who haven't been to church in years and for the ones who never miss a Sunday but secretly still feel empty inside. Jesus came for the overachiever who's tired of performing, for the underachiever who thinks they'll never measure up. Jesus came for people who load dishwashers incorrectly. Even them. Jesus came for the skeptic in the back row and the overconfident Christian in the front row. Jesus came for the person who barely made it through the doors today. Jesus came for the person who didn't come at all and is watching online. Jesus came for you and your story, your wounds, your family, your chaos, your secrets, your past, your future, your life. Jesus came for you. He came for the least of these. From the least of these. For people like Tamar, for people like Judah, for people like me, Matthew, and you. And the best response this Christmas is this, is to simply say, there's one more righteous than I, and his name is Jesus, and I need him. The nativity on your mantle is not just a decoration, it is a declaration that the King has come for all of us. Merry Christmas, Liquid. Merry Christmas. Will you pray with me? Will you bow your heads with me here in the room, across our campuses? I just want to guide us in a moment to meet this Jesus. Because in this room, I know there's Tamars and there's Judahs, and he came for both of us. First, I want to pray for the Tamars, because for some of us, Christmas doesn't feel all that magical. It feels heavy. Maybe your story feels cracked in places. Maybe it's the divorce you didn't want, the diagnosis that changed everything, the infertility that breaks your heart every month, the addiction that you keep circling back to, the loneliness that seems to hit harder in December, the relationship you lost, the pain or the secret that still sits in your chest. And if that's you, I just want to invite you to quietly open your hands, just palms up. No one's looking around. This isn't a performance. It's just an inviting posture that says, Jesus, I'm tired of carrying this by myself. So just throw your palms up open-handed if that's you. I just want to pray for you. Jesus, for every Tamar in this room, every person who feels forgotten, discarded, worn thin, would you just hold them steady right now? You bring peace into the parts of their story that they haven't felt peace in a long time. For the trauma, the betrayal, the grief, the shame, the chapters they wish they could erase, we ask that you would meet them in that exact place with your gentleness and kindness. And now, Jesus, just speak truth over them. Remind them they are seen. Remind them they are valued, that they are not too far gone, that their story is not finished. Remind them that what happened to them does not get to name them. You get to name them. That what was taken from them does not make them less, because you have made them more. Jesus, you came from a broken story so that they would know that their broken story is not beyond hope. Now I want to pray for the Judahs in the room. For those of us that struggle with comparison, with defensiveness, with worrying about how people see us, with keeping score, with holding resentment, with pretending that we've got it all together, avoiding asking for help. And if any of that sounds familiar in your life, I'm going to ask you to do something bold. I just want you to slip your hand in the air. No one's looking. This isn't about guilt or shame. It's about honesty. If you struggle with self-righteousness, just raise your hand right now in the room, at all of our campuses. This is really just about opening the door to Jesus instead of pretending everything's fine. Jesus, with every person that's a Judah with their hand raised, we pray that you would surround them with kindness right now. You never humiliate us when we come to the light. You help us to see the places that we've ignored. Help us to see the places where pride has made us distant, the places where we've been hard on others and easy on ourselves. Jesus, break what needs to be broken, not to hurt us, but to free us. Lead us into that Judah moment where we can say, she is more righteous than I, not as self-loathing, but as clarity, not as defeat, but as an awakening in us, not as punishment, but as the first step towards becoming whole again. Jesus, make us honest, make us soft where we've grown hard, make us courageous enough to face what's true, and remind us, every Tamar and every Judah in the room, that you came for all of us. You came for the least of these. And all of God's people say, amen, 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 amen.